I bought the cheapest Bugatti Veyron in the world, but there's one big problem with it. It's not the fact that it's in two pieces, it's because the gearbox is broken and not even Bugatti can.
A single call changed everything. Not to a mechanic, not to a dealership, but to a man who has built his reputation on fixing what the industry calls unfixable. A Bugatti Veyron, split in half, gearbox destroyed, sitting lifeless in a workshop for years, was about to get one last chance at survival. And the person being called in to decide its fate was Matt Armstrong, because when Mark McCann saw the reality of what he had bought, even he understood something important. This wasn't a repair anymore. This was a rescue mission. A few weeks earlier, it started like any other obsession in the world of hypercars. Mark had been hunting for a Bugatti Veyron for months, scrolling listings, studying chassis histories, watching cars disappear before he could even react. Then came the message. A Mansory-spec Veyron, rare, extreme, one of the most exclusive specifications ever built, and cheap. In the Bugatti world, those two words never belong in the same sentence. But curiosity is dangerous when mixed with ambition, because before long, Mark wasn't just looking at a listing anymore. He was looking at a problem waiting to happen, and that problem was worse than expected. When the car finally appeared in person, the truth hit harder than any photograph could prepare for. This wasn't a broken supercar. It was two halves of a legend. The gearbox removed, the engine exposed, panels scattered like they had survived an explosion. A machine worth millions reduced to a mechanical puzzle no one had solved in years. Most people would have walked away, but Mark didn't, because somewhere in the middle of that chaos, he saw something else. A challenge big enough to justify everything. Before committing fully, he did what experienced risk-takers always do when reality starts to blur into danger. He called specialists, phonocars, the people who don't guess. They diagnose. Their answer wasn't comforting, but it was enough. It's repairable, but it's complicated and expensive. That single sentence changed everything. Not a no, not a yes, a warning disguised as opportunity. Still, Mark needed certainty. Not hope, not optimism, numbers. So he went straight to Bugatti. And what he heard, there was a kind of number that changes decisions instantly. £300,000. Just for the gearbox. Not including complications. Not including labor. Not including the unknown. That was a ceiling of disaster. And now he had a choice. Walk away, or step further into it. He stepped in. The purchase was made. A two-piece Veyron now belonged to him. And just like that, the real story began. Because owning a broken Bugatti isn't the same as fixing one. It's the beginning of a long, expensive negotiation with reality. The car sat in pieces at Fonga's workshop, waiting. But even before tools touched metal, something else started breaking down. Confidence. Every inspection revealed more damage. Hidden failures. Poor previous repairs. Components that had been fixed but never actually solved. And worst of all, a gearbox filled with debris from human negligence. A multi-million-pound machine undone not by speed, but by mistakes. Meanwhile, the parts list kept growing. Bolts that cost hundreds. Seals that required sourcing through specialist channels. Components so specific they might as well have been custom-made every time they were ordered. This wasn't just engineering anymore. It was financial endurance. Then came the real test of belief. Mark made the decision to fund it. And funding it meant sacrifice. Cars he had owned for years, gone. His NSX, sold. His M3, gone. His RS200, sold. Even the S1 rally car that carried memories of pure driving joy, all converted into one thing. A chance to bring something back from mechanical death. But even after all that, the Veyron still didn't move. Because the car wasn't just broken. It was incomplete. And incomplete cars don't cooperate. They resist. Transport logistics carried the disassembled Bugatti across borders like a controlled failure, insured, documented, but still fragile in every sense that matters. Finally, it arrived at Fonga, and for a brief moment, there was silence, not the silence of peace, the silence of uncertainty. Then the call was made, not to a supplier, not to Bugatti, to Matt Armstrong. Because if anyone had experienced stepping into automotive chaos and dragging it back into life, it was him. Matt had already built a reputation on rebuilding what manufacturers refused to touch. His projects weren't restorations. They were confrontations with engineering limits. And now, that reputation was being tested again. A Bugatti Veyron, not crashed cleanly, not partially damaged, but structurally dismantled by failure. When Matt saw the condition, the question wasn't can it be fixed? It was something more uncomfortable. Where do we even start? Because everything mattered now. Every wire, every sensor, every hydraulic line. Modern hypercars don't forgive missing pieces. If one system refuses to communicate, the entire machine shuts down like a locked vault. And that's exactly what happened here. No diagnostics, no communication, just silence from a car that should have been alive. Even Ferrari-level tools struggled to understand it. And that's when reality hit hardest. This wasn't just mechanical failure. It was systemic collapse. Meanwhile, pressure kept building. Every day the car stayed incomplete. The risk increased. Not just of cost, but of permanence. Some failures become irreversible simply because time makes them worse. And still, the team worked, piece by piece, component by component, trying to rebuild a system that had already decided it didn't want to exist. Then came the emotional weight of it all. When the car was shown to those close to the project, reactions weren't technical. They were human, because no one looks at a split Bugatti and thinks about horsepower. They think about loss. But Mark wasn't looking at loss. He was looking at a question that had no guarantee of an answer. Can this come back? And more importantly, will Matt Armstrong be the one to bring it back? Because in this world, reputation doesn't guarantee success. It only guarantees attention. Now the workshop is in motion. Parts laid out. Systems tested. Failures identified. Every bolt tightened carries consequences. Every mistake becomes expensive instantly. And somewhere between engineering and obsession, the line has blurred completely. The Bugatti is no longer just a car. It's a test of skill, of patience, of belief, and of whether modern engineering can be rebuilt outside the factory that created it. But the biggest question still remains unanswered. Not whether it can be assembled, not whether it can be started, but whether, after everything, it will ever feel like a Bugatti again. And as the workshop lights stay on late into the night, one truth becomes unavoidable. Some machines don't just need repairing. They need proving. And this one is still waiting for its proof. A single decision turned a quiet business deal into a high-risk engineering war. One phone call. That's all it took to pull Matt Armstrong into a story that was already balancing between ambition and disaster. A Bugatti Veyron, one of the most complex machines ever built, was sitting in pieces, not lightly damaged, not partially repaired, split, abandoned, silent, and now it was under ownership of Mark McCann, a man who doesn't just collect cars, he tests their limits. But even for him, this was different. Because the moment he first saw it in person, the illusion disappeared completely. There's a big difference between broken supercar and engineered collapse. And this was the second one. The gearbox wasn't just faulty. It was gone. The chassis wasn't just damaged. It was separated. The car wasn't waiting for a repair. It was waiting for a miracle. Most people in that workshop didn't even try to hide their reaction. Because experience teaches you something important in this world. When a hypercar reaches a certain level of damage, it stops being a project and becomes a liability. But liability is exactly where Mark McCann sees opportunity. Before any tools were picked up, before any bolts were turned, before any diagnosis was complete, there was already a decision forming in his mind. This car was going to move again, even if it shouldn't, even if it couldn't, even if everything about it said walk away. But confidence alone doesn't fix a Bugatti. Reality does. So the first step was obvious. Call the people who actually understand it. Phonicars, specialists who don't deal in guesswork. They deal in consequences. Their assessment came quickly, and it wasn't sugarcoated. Yes, it can be repaired. But then came the part that mattered more. It depends on what you find inside. Because in hypercars, what you see is never the full story. And what you don't see is where budgets go to die. Still, that wasn't enough to stop Mark. He needed a hard number, a limit, a point where even ambition has to sit down and think. So he went to Bugatti. And that's where reality stopped being abstract. £300,000. Just for a gearbox replacement. And only at their approved facility in London. No shortcuts. No alternatives. No negotiation. That wasn't a repair cost. That was a warning disguised as a price. And suddenly, the broken Veyron didn't feel like a bargain anymore. It felt like a trap waiting to close. But the decision had already been made. And once a Bugatti is bought in this condition, there is no undo button. The car was transported in pieces to Fonless workshop like a controlled disaster. Every component separated, every system exposed, every weakness visible. And for a brief moment, before the work began, there was silence. Not calm silence. The kind that happens when everyone in the room understands the same truth at the same time. This could go very wrong. The first inspections confirmed it. Hidden damage everywhere. Suspension components destroyed. Hydraulic systems compromised. Electrical architecture refusing to communicate. And worst of all, the gearbox internal contaminated with debris from a previous failed repair. That's the kind of mistake that doesn't just break parts. It destroys trust in the machine. Because once metal contamination enters a precision gearbox like this, every rotation becomes a gamble. Every gear shift becomes a question. And every attempt to restart becomes a risk. Meanwhile, the financial reality kept expanding. This wasn't a single repair anymore. It was a rebuild of unknown depth. Even simple components turned into expensive decisions. Bolts that would cost a few pounds in normal cars suddenly became precision-engineered, manufacturer-only parts with extreme pricing and limited availability. And every missing piece slowed everything down. But the real pressure wasn't mechanical. It was psychological. Because every delay, every new discovery, every additional fault pushed the project closer to a difficult question. At what point does saving it become forcing it? And that's where Matt Armstrong enters the picture. Because he doesn't just rebuild cars. He rebuilds impossible situations. When he was called in, there was no dramatic announcement, no ceremony, just a workshop, a broken hypercar, and a group of people trying to understand where to even begin. And Matt's first reaction wasn't excitement. It was calculation. Because experienced builders don't get impressed by brand names. They get concerned by system complexity. And the Veyron is one of the most complex road cars ever made. Twin-turbo W16, 4 turbochargers, dual clutch systems, hydraulic and electronic integration across nearly every function, one missing signal, and the entire car refuses to wake up. That's exactly what was happening. No proper communication with diagnostic systems, no clean readouts, no predictable electrical response, just fragments of life in a machine that should have been fully operational. Even Ferrari-level diagnostic tools struggled to interact with it properly, and that changed the atmosphere immediately, because when manufacturer-level tools stop helping, you stop dealing with repair and start dealing with reconstruction. Every system now had to be verified manually, every line traced, every connection questioned, and that's where the real work began. Not rebuilding the car, but rebuilding trust in the car. Meanwhile, outside the workshop walls, something else was happening. This wasn't just a private project anymore. The automotive world was watching, because anything involving Matt Armstrong, especially with something this extreme, becomes part of a larger narrative, a challenge the internet wants to see completed, a problem the community wants to see solved, a story people start checking daily, like a live experiment in mechanical possibility. But inside the workshop, there is no audience. Only pressure, and metal, and time. The gearbox components were laid out carefully, each one treated like a decision point rather than a part. Because in a build like this, nothing is just installed. Everything has consequences. Every seal matters. Every alignment matters. Every bolt matters. And if even one detail is wrong, the entire system refuses to function. That's the reality of a Bugatti. It doesn't forgive. It doesn't adapt. It either works perfectly, or not at all. And that's what makes this rebuild different from anything else. Because success isn't just about assembling parts. It's about convincing a highly sensitive, highly complex machine that it is whole again. As days pass, progress begins to form, not in dramatic leaps, but in small, precise victories. A component cleaned and reinstalled. A system tested and responding. a section of the gearbox finally behaving as intended. Small signs. But in this world, small signs are everything, because they mean the machine hasn't rejected the idea of coming back to life. Yet, still, uncertainty remains, because no one, not even Matt, can fully predict what happens when final power is applied. A machine like this doesn't slowly wake up. It either returns instantly, or it doesn't return at all. And that final moment still lies ahead, waiting, silent, unfinished, and somewhere between ambition and engineering, one question still defines everything. When the key is finally turned, will it become a Bugatti again? Or will it stay exactly what it is right now? A masterpiece of failure waiting for its second chance? The deeper the team went into the Bugatti, the clearer it became that this wasn't a rebuild in the usual sense. It was an investigation. Every layer they uncovered didn't just reveal damage. It revealed decisions made long before Mark ever bought the car. Bad decisions. The kind that don't show up in photos or listings. The kind that only appear once you start undoing someone else's work. The gearbox, which was supposed to be the heart of the problem, quickly became something even more complicated. It wasn't just broken. It had been disturbed, opened, mismanaged, left in a condition where even specialists had to pause and reassess what they were looking at. Because in precision engineering, there's a big difference between wear and interference. Wear is expected. Interference is dangerous. And this had interference written all over it. Metal contamination inside critical areas suggested the same thing everyone feared, but nobody wanted to say out loud. This wasn't just a failure of parts. It was a failure handling, and that changes everything. Because once a system like this is compromised at a microscopic level, every repair becomes conditional. Every fix depends on what else is hiding deeper inside. Still, the work continued, not because it was easy, but because stopping wasn't an option anymore. Meanwhile, Matt Armstrong's role in the project wasn't what most people expect from a guest expert. He wasn't there to simply approve decisions or give opinions. He was there to interrogate the build. Every system had to justify itself. Every component had to prove it belonged. And that mindset changed the atmosphere immediately, because suddenly nothing could be assumed. Not wiring, not hydraulics, not even brand new parts. Everything had to earn its place in the rebuild. And the Bugatti responded exactly the way complex machines always do when they are under stress. Inconsistently. Some systems came alive immediately when tested. Others stayed silent. Some communicated partially, enough to suggest life, but not enough to be trusted. That's what made it worse. Because total failure is easier to understand than partial cooperation. At least when something is completely dead, you know where you stand. But when a system wakes up halfway, it creates hope. And hope slows decisions. Inside the workshop, that became the silent tension no one needed to say out loud. Every technician understood it. Every delay had meaning. Every unexpected reading had consequences. And every almost working system became another reason to keep going instead of stepping back. Outside the mechanical world of gears and hydraulics, the financial pressure remained just as real. Because projects like this don't just consume money in big moments. They consume it in constant, invisible ways. Shipping, special tools, diagnostic access, replacement components that only exist through specialist channels, and each one carries a price that feels disconnected from reality. A single bolt costing more than an entire engine from other cars, a seal that takes weeks to source, a sensor that only one supplier in the world can provide. It creates a strange